And
Hang on,
do
we're going to start over. Had no sound.
we have
There you
sound?
go,
now?
Barry.
You want to start over?
Still doesn't have sound. Just a minute. Keep talking. Rob,
Hey,
keep
Ben,
talking.
Ben, I'm at the edge of the camera.
Talk so we can get some sound. Rob, talk so we
Testing,
get
1,
sound.
2, 3.
Yeah.
Testing. Barry, can you hear me?
Yeah, he's got
How are we doing? Okay, we ready to start?
over.
All right. We're back again to continue our interviews with members from the past, from troops 21 and 52, as well as post 21 and 52. We left off talking to Alan Johnson. I'd like to continue and start there. Alan, I understand that you were a senior patrol leader in 1963, I
That's
believe.
correct.
And I wanted to ask you some questions about that. First of all, was that an elected position or were you appointed?
As I recall, that's the one position that Jack always appointed. The Green Bar would elect the, correct me if I'm wrong, the Green Bar always elected the patrol leaders, but Jack reserved the right of appointing a senior patrol leader because he had to have people that really get the job done, and that was a tradition there, I think.
And was it 6 months or a year?
I don't remember a time frame because I hung on a little longer than I probably should have because he didn't have anybody else at the time.
What was it like working with Jack?
It was great, of course. We knew by then. By the time you got there, you knew what his style was and what he expected and the things that he liked and how the troop clicked pretty well. So it was, as I say, you just had to cover a lot of details because he didn't do the fine details. He just gestured hypnotically and wanted the trips to happen and all the little stuff like what we'd eat and what the equipment would be had to be taken care of. So that was mostly it.
Let me ask you, and several of y'all might can comment on this, is the scope of Jack's knowledge, whether it be weather, nature. Anybody have any comments on that? Robert?
I have to say that my first experience with Jack was not with the Scouts. He was my general science teacher when I went to Rosemont Junior High School. So he found out I was in scouting and began to recruit me to come over to his unit at the time. But we had a lot of great times together in his science club because he had this deal in his old hoopy, you know, that he always drove around in. And he'd take us out on to astronomy and different things. And he was a lot of fun to be around. And his scope on everything was really amazing what topics he could help with.
Yeah.
Very, very creative fellow in a lot of ways. He had an exciting science course, although he tended to veer way off on the weather most of the time, which I understand the administration was not happy with. And he let us do much like in the science club, like he did in the Scouts. We got to do a lot of things we probably shouldn't do in the way of experiments and everything, but he was pretty liberal about that. So, but I came in kind of that way when I first met him, and then we became, of course, involved in scouting after that. So that's my take on Jack and his knowledge. It was astounding the stuff he could remember.
Well, I had the privilege of going to Philmont with him in 1978 on a post trip, and I remember we got great joy of asking him in the morning, Jack, it's going to rain today. And he'd sit there and he'd fold his arms and he'd just kind of rock back and look at the clouds, and then he would announce that at 2:15 we would have a brief rain, and typically he was right.
Yeah, we called him Noah for that very reason. Every time we went anywhere, it rained on us, you know. I guess that was in '54 when I first got acquainted with Jack and Ronald too. You were at Rosemont then too, as I recall.
Yeah, right.
So, and he recruited Ronald to come as well in the Scouts. So he was always actively thinking about the troop, one way or the other on the thing.
Alan, I think you had a few comments or experiences with Bob.
Yes, I did. This is just, to me, it was a funny story, and probably Kenneth was there, and Gary may have been as well, and Bobby deserves it anyway. You can sue me later. We were camped down at Edwards Ranch. What's left of Edwards Ranch is still behind all the buildings there on Hewlin. We did quick camping down there, but woke up in the morning, and the patrols were getting ready to cook breakfast. Some of the boys had discovered what seemed to be an aborted calf. there on the ranch in the woods, and quickly the fellas gathered around to take a look at this awful looking mess, and Jack wandered over there, and they were oohing and ahhing, and Jack gets him a stick and decides to carefully point out the different parts of the calf and what it would be, and that was just more than we could take. About that time, Bobby comes running up and pushes his way through the crowd, looks Ricky, says, "Oh boy," and me without a fork. I've never forgotten that one, Bob.
Was that me? I didn't. That probably happened. That's right.
We have a couple of people here that we haven't actually introduced. Robert, you were talking a few minutes ago, but if you would introduce yourself, we'd appreciate it.
I'm Robert Vivian. I was primarily affiliated with Post 21 before we moved down to Trinity Episcopal and became 52. So, but my association with Jack went back since 54, basically, and we had a lot of good times. Besides, other than scouting, as it turned out, he was quite a guy.
And you were lodge chief, I believe, what
Yes.
year? For
A
years?
couple of years lodge chief, right, back in the early days of Michigan, right after, I guess I was ahead of us, but Curtis and Dink and who else? I forgot who was the second. Oh, Bill Wilson, I think, was the second after that. I'm
Okay.
sure we'll get into that later. I don't remember all the dates on that. It's been
Okay.
50 years ago now.
Then Ron?
Oh, I'm Ron Leitner. Well, you know, most of the weather facts that I know today, I learned from Jack there, and what I remember about Jack, I always had a scientific explanation for everything, usually way over my head there, and none of it seemed to be very practical. But that was Jack, you know. Yeah. Oh, we did a lot of camping, you know, and there's so many things happened there that one was up by Moro, New Mexico. That's real primitive backcountry, and so we left the car and we headed out. We failed to look at our back trail for, for points there, reference points. So we after about 2 days, we decided, well, we better get back to the car. Well, I could see we were lost. We were turned around. We didn't know which direction. I said, "Hey, Jack, I think we're lost." He said, "I know it, but who cares? We don't have any place to go anyway." Jack's serious. If you have no place to go, you're not lost. Oh, a lot of stories there that I knew about, that I experienced with Jack, you know. So many of them there. It's hard for me to remember, you know, all the things that he did. Or
Well, while you're thinking about it, I know that the
Yeah.
three here in the middle, I believe, went on a post, or it was a canoe trip. I don't know, was it a troop or post canoe trip up to Charles Summers Canoe Base, and I was hoping that y'all could tell us a little bit about that trip and the tragedy that occurred on that trip.
I could tell you, get started and let maybe Robert want to.
The closer would have happened than I was.
I guess so. Well, it's remarkable, really, that there were very few tragedies on the endless amount of camping and wilderness events we were on. But in this case, our guide, not a member of our troop, but our guide, was struck by lightning, and we had pulled in under a cliff on this lake in Canada, and he was holding onto the wall, and the rest of us gathered around, held onto each other's canoes, and so we were there during this quite fierce squall that had come through, and lightning struck the tree on the top of the roof, top of the cliff, and came down the cliff and grounded actually through the guide and blew a big hole in the bottom of the canoe. And he had the only wooden canoe. Everybody else had aluminum canoes. And so we would all have been, electricity would have conducted through the entire group, I suppose, had we all, had he had aluminum canoes. So it was fortunate in that regard. But I was in a canoe with Ben Halsey and Hull Belmore, and in the front of Fred's canoe, Fred Moyer was the boy's name, was Bob Kokenauer, and he was holding onto the wall too, and his hand was burned, but I don't think there was any permanent injury there for him. But one of the scenes that I most remember is after we returned to the canoe base, and we were, I don't know, it seemed like 50 miles out. We were really into it.
2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days in, they had no idea whether it had been foul play or what, and so so the police had to question each one of us one at a time. So these little guys sitting there going one at a time, and we question and come out. And, what'd he say? What'd he say? You know, it was a very somber time. But actually, John Whitten and the other leaders, like Robert, really, and Colonel, too, really managed to pull us out of it. Jack wasn't there. They pulled us out of this, dazed and confused situation, and really made it happen. So I was grateful to them for figuring out how to get us back home again. You have anything to say about that?
Well, without taking up all afternoon going over that, it was not a very pleasant experience. We had a couple of good things did come of it. We combined the two trips basically. Because we had so many guys on there, we had John and Colonel and I, John Whitten, Colonel Delbert Slayton, and myself had one group, and then Terry and I forgot who else was on that.
You mean adults?
Yeah.
Gee, I can't
I've forgotten. Okay, I forgot who the other one was. We then got everybody together so we could kind of keep better. Well, we were short a guide too, so we had this guy named Soper who was our guide, and so we managed to get the two groups together. We hadn't had pepper for that whole first part of the trip because when we stocked our supplies, our pepper got put in their packs, and we only met up with each other ever so often. They wouldn't share. So Whitten was real hacked off about that, and we all wanted to have our pepper back, so at least that was kind of a goofy way to get it back, but we did. And it was, looking back on it, we can have some humor out of a very tragic circumstance, but the group pulled together, just like always, and we finished the tour out. They wanted to know if we wanted to cancel it and come on back, and nope, we're gonna go on like troopers. That was what the deal was, and the boys responded, and I think we're better men because of it. So.
Okay, Ron, do you have anything to
Pardon?
add to that?
Pardon?
Do you have anything to add to that?
I remember, I remember up under that cliff, that ozone was so strong it burned your nose, from the lightning. And I remember all the rocks coming down there. Good thing we weren't right under that. Robert, you remember?
Yeah, the
Well,
guy
Bob,
made
you
a
know.
big mistake doing that. He shouldn't have kept the guys out on the water. They were right close to land. All they had to do was
Yeah.
go right
And,
across and get out of the way.
Dead tree up on top there, and it split that all to. And you remember a guy named Chuck Borgeson?
Borgeson.
Yeah, he took him back.
He was one of the ones that carried
Yeah.
the body back.
Back to the Canadian checkpoint there. Luckily, we were inside the United States, or we may have had trouble there,
Well, I don't know. I thought they sent out a guy from Canada to take the deposition, a coroner from the.
Well, I thought he was from Minneapolis. I don't know.
May have been. I don't know. He came out
I
from
know
a
we-
pontoon plane and everyone,
I know
took
we're
everybody's notes.
just barely inside the U.S. Line. He may have been Canadian, Robert. I don't recall.
When we went through customs there with canoes on our back, that's the first time I've ever done that, So
Yeah.
we had to go through there. Bought our
Yeah.
Canadian fishing license.
Man, there was some terrible portages there. My legs ached for a month after I got back.
Now, Ron, I understand you went on a lot of camping trips with Jack
a lot
and
with
Troop.
Jack. Yeah, a lot with Troop and with Jack and.
We made a lot of Colorado trips together.
Oh, yeah.
That was
Oh,
those were always exciting on those things because the bus always broke down.
yeah.
That and it would rain, so we knew what to expect.
Did Jack have any kind of a philosophy regarding camping as far as, lots of equipment or little equipment? How did he approach?
He was a minimalist in a lot of ways, I think. He didn't believe in carrying a lot of stuff because he had the rest of us lugging it all around anyway. So, no.
I don't know. Jack was never too concerned about any kind of order, you know. He's a laid back guy there.
Organization was not his strong point. That's what and that's how he made everybody else get organized, though, because they knew he wasn't going to. If it was going to get done, we'd have to do it. So that worked out real well. And seemed like I always went up as quartermaster on that thing the whole time, doing the menus and going to the grocery store, and I'm still doing it, 50 years later, doing the food end of it. So interesting.
I've got an example that I've dredged up out of deep memory of Jack's humor, and also an illustration of that he was not above taking care of us all if we weren't proceeding to do so ourselves. And it was one of the Saturdays or Sundays out at Edwards Ranch, where we went many times, and I don't really, frankly, remember why we were there, if we had a capture the flag day or something else, but there were probably about 12 of us walking around near the river, and suddenly we hear some commotion from somebody said, "They're shooting," and we look across the river, and there's a band of young Lake Como residents, and so we all drop down behind trees or hunker down wherever we can, and after a few minutes somebody jumps up and says, I'm hit," and runs off. And at that very time, Jack appeared from nowhere and yelled out the best phrase I think I've ever heard in my life. He said, "Run for the high sheriff."
Did he?
And the marauders across the river, of course, disappeared. We all looked around. They're gone. And to this day, I'm not quite sure who coined the phrase, but they were always known from that day on as having been attacked by the Como tribe.
Very good. We've had somebody new join us on the panel. If you could please introduce yourself.
Actually, can we have Charles come introduce him briefly
Yes.
on camera, and then he
Sure.
can step back off?
Charles, come in.
I thought it'd be neat to have both generations in front of the camera.
Okay.
Charles, come around.
I'm Charles McAdams, and this is my dad, John McAdams. We were both in the troop, as well as my brother, James McAdams. And I'll let you fill in details about when you were in.
Well, Charles and James were in 52, of course, and I was in 21 from about, I believe it was 1954 through about 1960. And I remember my first big camping trip was going to New Mexico, and we camped, I think it was near Philmont, just off the highway. And it was kind of it wasn't a well-traveled highway, but it was a real nice place. It was for about a week and a half, and that was long. And I was very young and very new at what I was doing, but we had a great time.
Is that just a camp that the troop set up for
troop-
itself?
The troop, yes, it was a troop camp, but we took a bus, and we had probably 4 patrols, I'm guessing, and about 6 or 8 in each patrol. I'm not sure exactly the numbers. Again, I was pretty young, but
Now, Troop 21, where was it that it met?
I believe it was a University Christian Church. There was I guess it was a meeting hall that the church owned on property adjacent to their church, and we had a meeting room and storage in the back of it, and then we had room for patrol meetings. I don't know if it was actually next door or the same building, but it was right close there. And we had, we went around in the back and played, for our free time.
What do you remember the meetings being like, and what was the typical thing that y'all would do?
Well, we'd line up and we'd have kind of a regular thing we went through, the scout oath, and whoever was leading it would have some people. I think somebody in each patrol would do something. Part of to recite something that we knew, that we were supposed to know. And then we would break up and have, I guess, announcements then, but then we'd break up and have a patrol meeting, and then after that we'd have, some fun and games after that. So, and some of those times there were, instead of the playing, we'd have training. I mean, it was, kind of a combination, whatever Jack or whoever was there with, whatever they had on their mind to do.
For the rest of y'all, is that pretty much consistent with what y'all remember?
Right.
Bob?
We always had a training session. Someone would teach us to do something, some scout skill or something. I can remember learning to pack a backpack, and you had to, a perfectly packed backpack was a packet made up of lots of other smaller packets. I remember telling you that. And when I packed to come here, I packed that way when I came here. So some of these things stick with you. But then at the end, you would throw the backpack against the wall, and if it stayed together, then you had done it correctly. If it fell apart, then you had to do it over again. But there was always a skill element there, and I do remember this session where we all stood on this parade ground, and we had to recite the oath, and a section of the Scout law or something, but you had to memorize.
Yeah,
you had to memorize these, and you were called upon at random to say them, and it always made me nervous because it was a lot to remember. It was quite a lot to remember.
Well, that was usually how you got released to go to patrol meetings or to go across the street and play the game, was tying the knot correctly or reciting the law or things like that. The incentive was to get it right so that you could go play Red Rover or something.
What were some of the games that y'all played?
Red Rover seems to be the one I recall the most, and how we never killed anybody in that, I'll never know.
We played artillery in the hall when the weather was bad, seems like. We
What was
played
that?
Artillery in the hall, the meeting hall,
What?
when the weather was bad, but we played with tennis balls. It was pretty-
Tell me how that game worked.
Well, there are two sides to the room, a line down the middle, which I think in our case there were some columns down the middle, and you divide evenly to both sides, and if you get hit with a ball, you're out. So the key is to try to be one of the last guys in there. So you definitely, if you were my size, you stayed behind somebody big. But it was good training for playing the wimpy version that we did in public school with large red rubber balls.
Ask about favorite trips.
Okay. Wanted to find out if any of y'all had any favorite trips or particular trips that you remember, camping or otherwise.
No, I know.
Okay.
I'm not sure if well, a couple of these guys I think was on it. Between Christmas and New Year's in 1961, I believe it was, we went to Philmont. And from the minute we packed the bus till we got back was just an adventure, because somebody was too cheap to fix the radiator in the bus, so we had to drain it every night so it wouldn't freeze. And when we got to Philmont, we had to back it up a hill so that we knew it would start when we left. And I think somewhere down around Truth or Consequences, we were hanging flashlights out the window because the generator had gone down and there was no headlights. But you wouldn't take for that. Herd Floor was about a freshman in college, and he had packed a Foot Locker to do an accounting practice set, and I don't know what all on this trip. And he had coerced some of the guys to carry in that, because the night we got there, it was after dark. The snow was deep enough we had to quit driving the bus. And so we had to pack in about the last mile. And he coerced people to carry in this Foot Locker up there. But, and I think Terry Wilkes was on that trip. As I recall, he did all the cooking. It was just, there was a lake that was frozen over. We played hockey with a Spam can, came home bruised. I think about 14 of us went, and Simon, or who was it that, we've actually got a log, the journal, the daily journal we maintain. We just passed it around, and you make an entry at will. And there's a copy here today of that trip.
Okay. Very great.
I just came in to
Bob.
defend myself. I heard my
My
name.
favorite trip, I think, was
I thought you were going to replace me there, but
the Colorado trip, which we climbed West Spanish Peak and were there for a week or more. It was the trip back that was most memorable because some of us rode back in the van that Jack was driving, and he was pulling a trailer which was overloaded by twice as much as it should have been holding. And so we kept blowing out tires, and we never had a spare, so we'd unhook the trailer, and Jack would drive around to find a town that had the tire, and he'd never buy a new tire. He'd always buy a used tire, and so we blew 5 tires, and we were 48 hours late getting home. Our parents were, where are they? What are we doing with our kids? But that was more typical than not, actually, of some of the travel.
yeah, maintenance was something Jack never understood there. Yeah, right there. Hey, I can tell you one more little story too. The Jack liked to drink coffee. He learned to drink coffee, but sometimes he'd drink just a half a cup, and he had that old carry-all, and he'd just throw it in the back. I had just gotten a new backpack. I had it back here. Jack drinks about half a cup of coffee, throws it in the back, right on my new backpack. I wanted to kill him.
Well, I understand that Jack would special order his vehicles with no headliner, anything that could.
He just turn around, throw it in the back. Right on my new back.
Well, we've been joined by somebody else. If you'd introduce yourself, please.
My name is Herd Floor.
And why don't you tell us what period of time you were involved?
I joined the troop, Troop 21 in 1952, and I was there until the demise of 21 and moved with Jack to 52, and then off and on through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I was active with both the troop and the post.
Okay, very good. Well, you coming up here reminded me of a topic that I think was dear to Jack, and that was singing. My impression is that Jack enjoyed singing Scout songs, and particularly songs that he learned in Australia and so forth. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I can tell you the first songbook. I can tell you how that came about and why that came about. Joe Studdard and I, as post 21 members, had a competition going as to who could find the most interesting song. And one of the things that we did fairly frequently for post meetings was we'd go down to Trinity Park over there by Colonial Country Club and build a fire and go down to the A&W stand and buy several gallons of root beer, and we would just sit around the fire singing songs. So Joe and I would come up with different songs and teach them to the unit. And then after Joe died of cancer, his mother gave me his songbook, and I was talking to Jack at that point about, and I was secretary of the Order of the Arrow at a lodge here at that time, and so I had the OA's mimeograph machine and all those kinds of supplies stored at my house that we would wag out to Worth Ranch for ordeals. And it just occurred to us that maybe what we should do is put together a troop songbook that we could use for these kinds of occasions. And by this time, there were so many songs that it was hard for anybody to come up with any one of them. So we did that at my house, actually. There were 3 or 4 guys that were typing stencils. There were a couple of people manning the mimeograph machine. There were other people who were putting the pages together, running the pages back and forth, and we assembled them on the dining room table, and that's really where the first songbook came from. And I think actually I was involved in probably the first three of putting those things out. But that's where the songbooks came from. Now, we'd done a lot of singing before that, and Jack had no sense of melody at all, as all of us who grew up in this unit know.
But he knew.
So
but he knew all
his
the words.
rendering, he knew all the words, but his rendering of the melody was problematic at best. So we got some of these songs really sounded quite different when other people sang them. But that's where the songs came from.
Well, I think, and any of y'all can comment, was singing a big part of the troop program?
A huge part. I can still remember many of our trips in the evenings. Jack singing these long, drawn-out songs of heartbreak and death. You know, and it's kind of. But they were wonderful songs. But somebody always died in the end of these story songs.
Well, if nobody else was singing, Jack was singing. One of the things that was almost the kiss of death for scouts, it was riding with Jack. I mean, if you had any other way to get to wherever it was we were camping, you did that, because Jack was always the last to leave and the last to get there. And I can remember one particular trip, and I don't know where we were going, but we were going through Waco. We were going around the Waco, the traffic circle there in the southern part of Waco, and we went around it about 6 times. Now the rest of us were not paying too much attention. Jack was singing, and we kept going and going and going around. Finally, somebody said, "What are you doing?" You know, and what he was doing, he was following this bird that was flying through the traffic circle, and he was interested in what that was. So he was singing some song, driving around the traffic circle repeatedly, and in pursuit of this bird. That's very typical. And he would get excited and pound on the dashboard as he was singing, and pound on the accelerator, and the car would jerk back and forth. It was an experience riding with Jack.
Very much so. Well, I want to wrap this up by thanking everybody who came today and participated.
We're actually just switching out a big group, one more group.
Oh, we do have another group.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought we were wrapping it up then.
We'll keep Herd and pull everybody up.
I need to go there with Alan there, so is there anyone that can take my
Well, yeah,
place?
you've just been kicked out. Herd's staying, everybody else is gone.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay, well, you're welcome. Heard, we'll see you. Okay.
Well, it's hard when somebody's there. Well, I kept wondering why y'all weren't shifting. I was going, okay, we need.
That's just almost too big a pan to get everybody good.
Scoot in some more. Can you scoot in any more at all?
Yeah, I probably can.
The chairs are jammed up against each other.
Yeah.
Oh.
We can't go any further this way.
Charles, can you scoot in? There you go. Rob, you can go.
Okay.
Got one extra, maybe.
We'll continue with our interviews of past members of Troop and Post 52, Troop and Post 21. We're the group that we currently have with us date primarily from the 1950s, perhaps some of the early 60s. And we have a whole new group, and what I'd like to do is to kind of go down the line and have you make a quick introduction of who you are and what period of time was involved. Let me start with the far end over here.
I'm Charles Dreyfus. I was at, what? Okay. I'm Charles Dreyfus. I was at Troop 52 from 1955 to 1958.
I'm David Keppy. I joined in 1950, went to 1953, came back in 63, and I guess I've been serving with the group in some manner since then.
Okay.
I'm Bo Grimshaw. I got into Fort Worth in 1955 and was active in the post in the post work until 1958. Then interspersed after that when I went to Texas Tech.
Tom Parker. I guess I got in there in about 1952, and then was associated with the troop and the post until 60 when I moved to Lubbock.
Okay, and then to my
I'm Bob Vivian. I think I joined somewhere around 1954 and stayed with it through the end of the 70s, thereabouts, often known as an advisor and whatnot.
Herd Floor. I was in the troop in 1952 and the post, and then troop and post 52 through the 60s, and then periodically through the 70s and 80s.
I'm going through dementia, so I can't remember the actual years, but actually it was about 1951. Curtis Firkins got me to go, and I stayed active through graduation of high school in 58. Dick Johnson, I guess I ought to say.
Okay, well, let me start at the far end. And I'm sorry, what was your name again?
I'm Charles Dreyfus.
Charles.
Yeah, I joined.
My understanding is that you were a member of, is it Troop 52 or Post 52?
I joined Troop 52 in 1953.
Okay.
That turned 11, and that was the one close to home.
And who was the scoutmaster of that troop?
Was it VTech?
He came in a little later on. I'm not entirely sure who it was. There were several involved.
Not still Pop Lewis by that time, was it?
Pop Lewis was gone. It was a grand tradition, and the photographs of Pop Lewis and Troop and Post 52 over at the old church on the south side were very prominent on the wall. It was a grand tradition. The flag had pennants and ribbons going back for maybe 30 or 40 years. It was great. There was a strong tradition there. And sometime between 53 and I guess 56, they became interested in riflery. They had a range at on some agricultural land at Springtown with a brush arbor that the boys built, and would camp there and camp at other places. They really specialized in riflery, and it was pretty good. Had a great time there, and when I turned 14 and was ready to be an explorer, I joined Post 17, another grand tradition that was, for one thing, going to Worth Ranch, and that was something I was looking for. And then I met all these guys at 21 through the Order of the Arrow.
Okay. When you said they were interested in riflery, was it the troop that was interested in it, or was it Post 52?
Well, they might have met on different nights, I don't know. Troop and Post 52 were very much the same. It was a small organization, and seems to me that everyone was doing riflery. It was fun, it was good, and I was ready to continue a more traditional scouting program and joined a troop that did go to Worth Ranch. It was a real good program. I'm glad I was in it. And then, as I say, I met all these guys through the Order of the Arrow, and we had a really great time.
Okay. At some point, I understand that Troop 21, that was run by Jack, moved over to Trinity Episcopal and became Troop 52. Is there someone that can kind of summarize those events for us?
I could say what was there.
Okay.
There weren't that many guys doing riflery, and it was fathers mostly who were the adult leaders, the scoutmasters and whatnot. It sort of passed along.
You're talking about at 52.
At 52, yeah.
Trinity Episcopal.
Yeah, it was Trinity Episcopal in 52. Had a grand scouting tradition and a very small troop and post with a riflery program. So when it was time for Jack Boyd to come over there, there was room for a large traditional scouting program to take up back where Pop Lewis left off. It was ready for Jack. I wasn't a member of the church there, but I'm confident that he was entirely welcome.
Okay.
The Troop 21 was kind of a victim of too much success. The organization really took off under Jack. There was an extensive scouting and camping program. Jack went camping, rain, sleet, snow, whatever, at least once a month, every month, I think, of his life in scouting. And Troop 21 was no exception. We went all kinds of places. Lots, Worth Ranch was a lot of it. In fact, we were the first troop to camp down in the bottoms at Worth Ranch. But the University Christian Church was trying to get a strong Sunday school program going, and a lot of the members of the Sunday school were in the troop. And those camping trips didn't end until Sunday afternoon, starting Friday nights and ending Sunday afternoon. So a lot of these kids were, and I was one of them, were not there for the Sunday school program. It didn't help also that Jack was kind of maverick back in those days, and that he was teaching a very much a boy-centered program. That was this was a time when scouting was doing militaristic kinds of things. This is right after World War II, and troops were camping in rigid rows and around a parade ground and that kind of thing. And we never did anything like that. Oscar Blanton, who was the assistant scout executive, was one of the elders in the church, and he had some huge philosophical differences with Jack. And so he was probably leading the charge to get Jack out of there. Probably all of us, actually. I don't mean to be saying all of this story, because probably all of us can talk about this, but there was a big. Ultimately, there was a big meeting with the members of the church, the families of the church, to announce that Jack was no longer going to be the scoutmaster at Troop 21, and the families were invited for their children to stay if they wanted to, that there would be some kind of scouting program there, but very few did. Almost everybody moved en masse to Troop 52, and Post 21 became Post 52 at that same time.
Okay. Did any of y'all make the move?
Oh, yeah. you
Almost
bet.
all of us.
All of you did?
I think they only walked down there one night after we got
Yeah.
the marching orders was to get out. So they had. I'll never forget that night. The business administrator came over to do the coup de grace to Jack, and oh, I'm sorry. They sent the business administrator from University Christian over there to tell Jack, this is all over now. And so Jack said, well, when I took this job, it was a temporary. I just didn't realize it was going to be 25 years of temporary. And so he shuffled about, looked kind of anxious, and then left. So right after that, we moved down there to the Episcopal Church, which was fine with us. They were happy to have us, and we were happy to have a home. And we negotiated about maybe a week or two, meeting with the people over there, the institutional representative and whatnot, and was ready to go. And it was a very successful move. I don't think they've had a scout program at a University Christian since. I know it caused a lot of unpleasantness among certain members there. And but anyway, it worked out for the best, I think. They tore the scout building down and put up another part of the educational system. They needed the land, and so it worked out okay.
We almost burned it down for them one night.
Okay.
In the patrol meeting room up there, everybody had the little cubicles there, and for some reason we had some gasoline to try to get some paint off the floor. I'm not sure what the details were there, but there was a stain on the floor, and somebody said, "Well, let's just burn it off," and that sounded like a good idea at the time. But while the match was down there and lit, I think it was John Tinsley came in with a little bit more gas to make sure that it did, and poured that on there, and his leg caught fire, and he's jumping around with flames on his leg, and I run outside, and there's some TCU boys across the street playing football, and they had the presence of mind to come in and grab a fire extinguisher and put John and the wall out there. So it's a wonder that I survived in the troop after that. I was the patrol leader. My association, I did want to tell this story. My association, or family association, with Jack Boyd started back in the 40s after the big war. My dad was scoutmaster at that time of Troop 10 at Arlington Heights Christian Church, and he was there at summer camp and had a boy that wanted to, or two that wanted to stay over after the regular session. And he talked to Captain Kidd, and Captain said, "Well, Jack Boyd's going to be here this next week," and said, "I trust him with any of the kids." And so I guess it was two boys that stayed over that year, and then that's my dad met him, and the association there stayed. So that when I then started into scouting, we went to another troop and tried that for a couple of meetings, and Dad said, "Well, this is not good scouting as far as I'm concerned." And he did a little scouting around and found that Jack was about to come back into town from Mahia or wherever he had been. And so I started in meetings there, and William Beverly West III was running the troop at that time, and with another gentleman. And I think about maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, then Jack came back, and then the rest is why we're all here today.
So about what year was it that Jack would have taken over Troop 21?
Gosh, 49, was it 49, 48,
Yeah.
49, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there.
Came in and everything there.
Yeah.
I need y'all to use your microphones.
Yeah, sorry.
Got 3 of them. Watch it.
So about 1948, 49?
Yeah. I would say it was 48 or 49. That's for my time. I came in 50 through 53. I was a scout. These boys know a lot more about the administration than I do, but I did have a wonderful time with Jack. All his experiences he carried us out on. And I noticed when you talked about going out camping alone, that was to me, what I understood was one of Jack's theories was that let them make their mistakes and let them try and figure out how to get out of it. We're not going to organize them into anything that just done. He says, just turn them loose, let them spread out through the woods. Then he'd spend hours walking, trying to find out where they ended up camping. And it was so good. It was fun, but everybody survived. We all learned a heck of a lot from that too. And I owe that man so much. It's not funny.
Well, good. I think you had talked earlier about some of the transportation bus trips.
That was one of my duties. I somehow ended up with a clean driver's license, and only one that could get insurance. And that was, I don't remember the year, they bought a 1949 Greyhound standard shift 6-cylinder bus, and I learned how to drive that monster. And then it was from then on to Corpus Christi, to Padre Island, to Lake Greeson, to Colorado, I don't know what all. And it was a real tug bustle, because I heard earlier that Jack's term of maintenance is why, it's running. No, he said, it's not running. He said, that's okay, let's go. And, but I had a ball, like I said. It was a lot of breakdowns, a lot of sitting on the side of the road looking for gasoline when they forgot to fill us up when we left on a trip. And
we won't even go to the brakes failing in Dallas.
Okay, now that scared everybody half to death.
Including me. Phew.
I have a transportation story on our first bus. We'd come into this to Trinity, and they were very supportive. They also had a trust fund, which we didn't know about till we got there, and that worked out really well, because then we had some funds to do things with. So they decided they were going to buy this international school bus. And we got ready to go to Colorado, of course, and I was supposed to go down and pick it up. Well, we got down there to pick it up, and it turned out that the papers hadn't been signed for the title. So the guy asked me if I was 21. I said, yeah, and signed the thing, and I was 17 at the time. So we bought the first school bus, and of course we got ready to get in and go, and the battery was dead. So that was at the International Harvester House down there, right south of the post office. So they went and got jumper cables, and we got started. Didn't have any gas. We stopped somewhere along the way and put in $4 or $5 worth of gas to get it to the back to the church, because the kids were there lined up with parents and everything. We're just now buying this old bus, right off the bat, with a dead battery besides. And so that's kind of the way our transportation deal started before we upgraded to the Greyhound, or we thought we were upgrading anyway. But it was always, from then on, just one continual battle after another trying to keep all this stuff running. And the stories on the buses, we could fill an afternoon talking about those silly things. So.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to have y'all talk about is the role of the troop and the post, or any of y'all, in the beginnings of the Order of the Arrow in our council. Is there any of y'all that can talk about that?
Oh yeah, we'll have somebody here, I'm sure.
This has been going on a very long time, from day one.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
I am.
Yeah. Hold it like that, Miller says.
Yeah, good. I am Ding Starnes, and my part of this is by way of the Order of the Arrow, because I did not know Jack Boyd until the very first meeting, the organizational meeting of the Order of the Arrow, which was on this church's property on the other end, there at the corner of 6th and Henderson Street, which is a story all unto itself, different. And so I began there, not seeing Boyd, but Boyd watched me. And years later, he told a story repeatedly about how he noticed me straight off and what I did and how I did it. And he loved to tell that story, and I loved to not listen to it. But anyhow, what happened was, as chief of the Order of the Arrow, things happened. There was nothing for the boys as we now think of it. There was no citywide anything. We were all out there at the mercy of super scoutmasters and things like that. But once I was in, then everything changed, and so I started working at Worth Ranch in '53 and saw the beginning of some of these boys here. Mike Gould working, Captain Kidd figured out something for us to do. And then the next summer, and then in '55, I had graduated in May from the National School for Camp Managers because I'd been working at the Scout office for a whole year, and that's where I began to figure out who was Walter Thanish and who was John Unger, because John's father was the Chief Scout Executive. So then, '55, after the National School, and get through that, then what are we going to do? And that is when I saw Dickie Johnson and Walter Thanish climbing into that rotten old Pontiac station wagon, leaving for Philmont. I still didn't know them. I just knew that guy is Boyd, and these guys are in danger. And Bob Armstrong, who was not in the post or the troop at that time, but he was on the staff, we were stacking those iron cots piled high, and these guys are laughing and carrying on, and they're going to Philmont. And Armstrong says, "Tell you what, let's hitchhike to Philmont and catch up with them," which is a whole story unto itself, a lot of stories. We forget that. So then whenever we come back, I'm going to TCU for the first time a semester, and I'm sitting over there looking out the window, and I can see Boyd's troop meeting, the old grocery store, and I thought, Boyd is doing something different, or not quite wrong. It could be better. But he had a senior patrol. There was no post 21, maybe on paper, but not in function. Now, all these kids were getting older and beating the hell out of 11 and 12-year-old kids. And I thought, I came from a grand post. I know what a post looks like. I've read the books. Jack hasn't. I know the policy. I know the program. And so I went across the street there to Jack, because we knew each other. And I said, Jack, what you need here is a post. I do. I already have an organization. And they're all wearing the stripe over here. It says Senior Scouts. There was no post. They were all thought of themselves as a senior patrol in a troop. And I said, no, Jack, a post. They do things differently. Oh. And he says, well, okay, where would you meet? And I said, we'd meet right here. And he says, but we're already here. When could you meet? You can't meet on Monday night or Tuesday night or Thursday night. And I said, we're going to do something different. He said, what's that? We're going to meet on Wednesday night. This was the great thing. And he hit the roof and he said, there is no unit in Region 9 that meets on Wednesday night. I said, we'll do that. And the rest is history. It was instantaneous success. And we have around here those that were in there immediately. I said, keep the ones that want to stay in the Boy Scouts with you, the older boys, and let the others come over here. And so it went.
Robert, do you have any comment on that?
Not yet.
It hasn't stopped, guys.
Well, I'd like to make a few comments. There's a couple people that aren't here today, Curtis Firkins and Paul Kepi, and we, as they've all indicated over the time here, when we camped, I'm not sure we were reaching for scout particular rules that happened in the past. We went in small troops, small group camps, even though when there were big groups. Paul and David and Curtis and we went off. We were maybe not that far, a couple of miles away from the rest of it. And, we learned to cook, be independent. It was one of the greatest things that ever happened for us. Was Paul was the leader. He was the oldest at that time, and he was kind of our leader. And it was a great thing. A couple of other things there's lots of stories Dink's did, but one of the things, and I have to blame it on Dink, that probably helped me in the rest of my life is he forced me to be a leader in a small group meeting one time, and I just didn't want to do it. And so Dink made me do it, and from that time on, it gave me a leadership, some confidence in leadership, and so we can blame him for whatever happened after those years. But it was a great time, and I'm sorry Curtis and Paul weren't able to make it today.
And Walter Thinnish and Bob Armstrong. Golly,
Yeah.
the old guard.
We have a new person joining us. If you'd introduce yourself, please.
I may date you guys some.
Need to hold your microphone.
I'm running almost 70 here before too long. And we had heard of Philmont. It was starting to be talked about in 1946. And I'm not sure the first trip to Philmont when that was, but I wasn't part of that. And the Worth Ranch was very much on one of our big agendas, and we came home on Sunday. One of the biggest things, of course, other than Jack coming around for an evening meal, was the parents talking about him. So the real thing that we enjoyed, of course, Worth Ranch was fun for all the kids. But the thing that we really liked was playing tricks on Jack. Jack was vulnerable to that. And we had Dick McCullum, Dr. Dick McCullum, Charlie Hillard running around in his underwear. I got pictures of him. There's, I think Ed Carson may not be with us today, but anyway, he was there. Jack Boyd would be in pursuit after us, very much of a running champ, he could run pretty good. And so in doing so, he tripped over a barbed wire fence, did a complete flip, and landed on his back. Well, that just quietened the whole group. The whole group was very quiet at that point, and we had fun with Jack, and that was one of the biggest outings we had there at Worth Ranch.
What's your name from?
Bill Hawkins.
Okay.
All right. And Bill, you were there from the early days of...
Oh yes, very early days, 46 on to 50. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Did your experience influence the rest of your life?
Oh, not really too much. The parents were involved in the church, and I heard a little bit from Mr. Hurd himself earlier about the question of the troop, and how it would exist at the church level. And I think the parents did get involved with this. I think they really did show up in numbers to maybe there was some criticism maybe, and that may have been the end of what 21 had. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Food and Jack was an interesting subject also, because I don't know if any of our predecessors here have talked about this, but Jack would make the rounds. Each night he'd be at some other troop member's house, just happen to show up for a little advice or whatever about dinner time. Well, my folks figured out one night we were having shrimp, and Jack said, well, no, I don't like shrimp. That's okay. I'll go on. So if we were kind of short of food sometime when Jack would show up, my mom would come in and say, well, Jack, now we're going to have some shrimp here in a little while. If you'd like to stay with us, we'd be glad to have you. Well, no, that's okay. I'll go on.
Okay, we need to wrap it up. Is there any final comment anybody need to make?
Let me say this about Jack, since that's what we're all here about. He really taught, his idea was to teach leadership and letting the boys do it. He taught independence and leadership, and that's what I remember about Jack that I feel I owed him. He would try to bring out whatever talent you had and make it happen.
Did you have a comment?
I didn't know Jack as well because I wasn't part of the troop. I was a member of the post. I remember Dink and his contributions, which furthered, I think, what Jack was doing, but it did it in a different way. As he said, it was to be a different kind of activity. And I remember particularly the reading that we used to do and the encouragement in expanding our minds as well as leadership qualities. And that we could all come back for this occasion, I think speaks marvelously for what Jack Boyd had done for this troop and for all of us. It's a wonderful experience and tribute to him.
Okay. Again, we thank everybody that participated in being here today to talk about the reunion tonight. This evening we'll have a couple of hundred people there. The role that the scouting units of Troop and Post 52 and 21 has played in our lives. Next week there's a flagpole dedication at Worth Ranch in honor of Jack Boyd. And I think this evening out in the stockyards we'll all have a good time and a good visit. So thank you very much.
Thank you.